So this is the, welcome to the panel. Here, ask my panelists to come on up. While they're sitting down, I just want to ask everyone here, how many people in the audience have one of these in their pocket? Nobody has a credit card in their pocket? Okay, great. You're all liars. No. Okay, so I'm sure a lot of people have these. These are great devices. You put them in your jeans, you put them in the wash, you fly to Brazil, to China, you get off a plane, you start buying things. But there's one thing these devices cannot do. Send me information about my payment. Set up a recurring device. Put a smart contract in for staying on a vacation. It's not working. There's no intelligence in this device. So hopefully this panel will illuminate the opposite of this, which is zero intelligence, zero AI, and take us into the future. So I'm going to start off introducing our panelists. First of all, we have here Sanjay from Yapstone. He's the Chief Technology Officer. He's responsible for product development, infrastructure, security. And if you don't know Yapstone, I think they're doing billions of dollars of payments. And they work with very large platforms like HomeAway and so on and so forth. They've just raised $71 million in a venture round, so congratulations to them. Next to him is Amarpreet Singh, who is a marketing lead at Square. He leads a team of marketers in order to acquire net new customers across all products and build a new brand. And he has worked at Intel and Google before that. And then next to him is Musab, who's a recognized leader in engineering and global payments, as well as money movement. He is at eBay, and prior to that, he was at Capital One and at PayPal. And then at the end of the table, we have Jagdeep Singh, Sahota, who has been executing in payments for 18 years. He has 23 global patents in the payment space. He's currently at JP Morgan Chase. He spent over 15 years at Visa, and he was at PayPal before that. So thank you for joining. I want to start off asking a question to the panelists. We've heard a lot about AI in the keynotes. We've heard what it is, what it isn't. I'm going to ask Sanjay if you can define AI in the context of digital payments.
No, thank you so much, Vijay. So from my perspective, as you illustrated with the card, which is the primary mechanism for payments, there's no intelligence in it, but AI is really bringing a big revolution in the payment space. So primarily in two areas that, as we see it. One is around customer experience with things like conversational commerce. We're going to talk a little bit more about that during the discussion. And the second area is around really securing the transaction. Around fraud management, AML and compliance, as the complexity of moving money within the country and across the country as you do commerce has significantly increased. Both fraud and AML compliance has become a very, very big challenge to make the experience still pretty good. So both those areas are primed for AI and machine learning.
So, Musab, can you try to define what you think AI is in the context of digital payments?
Absolutely. At eBay, we talk about kind of finding your version of perfect, and I think that with machine learning and artificial intelligence in money movement, it is the ability to be able to observe and learn from my behaviors. And when I say my, I mean that word literally because it's very personalized. It's my behavior, and be able to articulate ways that money can move seamlessly when I need it, however I need it, at whatever time of the day that I need it, and do that 100% accurately. Because you know what? If you mess my order of shoes, I can return them. Mess with my money, we have a problem. So we take that very seriously.
Thank you. Jagdeep, I want to sort of ask you a question around data and AI meeting together. Anybody here who's worked in the FinTech space knows that data has been around forever. We've had reams and reams of data. Traditionally, it's been manually worked on through rules-based systems, human intervention, coding. The promise is now that AI with deep learning and algorithms can automate that processing of the data. What are you doing at JP Morgan Chase in that space?
So, there's lots of things going on with data just itself. So there's a lot of data that's generated just from the minute that you touch our website to when you do a transaction to when you exit. So I think there's operational efficiencies that we can bring with data. So knowing what you're here to do, if we know that before you even get to us. So could we put you in context? And The other aspect of it is doing risk, so the fraud question that came up earlier, right? So if we can just reduce the negative, or what we call false negatives, or just when we knew who it was, but we still put the wire for a secondary check, right? So today before we brought in AI, we had a rule that every time we brought in a new user onto our platform, the first wire was going to get reviewed by someone in risk. Now, that's not the experience that you want someone to have when they're doing their first transaction with you. But because that was the rule set up, we were not using any of the data, any AI to make that happen. Today, we're getting to that point where we can let you do up to a certain amount without putting any secondary checks or dynamic rules in place for making that happen.
So how many folks in the audience are actually working on AI or machine learning projects in some way, shape, or form? So about maybe a little less than half, maybe a third. One of the issues that happens is people fall in love with these models. So Amarpreet, I wanted to ask you about Square, because Square has been, amazing in user experience and changing payments, but do we sometimes kind of forget about what problem we're solving?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking that at Square, I have made a lot of mistakes myself, because you fall in love with the dream of AI and machine learning. And one of the issues that I've seen us make repeatedly is not start with a business problem, but would start with this very shiny technology of AI. And if that's a starting point, I've seen us always go in the wrong direction. So for me, Vijay, the biggest learning has been to start with is there a customer struggle or a customer need or a business problem? And once you have that, can we get data very quickly, which is like high fidelity? And start with simple rules-based systems or heuristics and show the value very quickly and learn very quickly. And over time, go to more sophisticated AI models. And that to me should be the natural progression. But knowing this for a long time, still I think I've seen myself and my teams make the same mistake, because these things are so shiny and
so what are some of the strategies to avoid falling in love with a model and actually focusing on a consumer experience?
I think for me, just awareness that it has to start with customer need, business problem, and then fast iterative learnings. And you just have to have systems in place and awareness to just always focus on that. But I think it's a constant struggle.
Sanjay, any ideas?
Yes, I think I wholeheartedly agree with the comment. In fact, I think in the spirit of everyone trying to put forward an AI project that sounds interesting, sounds sexy, people forget what problem we are trying to solve. So if you're building a chatbot that is based on a decision tree, that may be good enough for you to actually make a material difference. Let's make that difference first before you embark on now making it model driven. And because if you start with model driven, those chatbots can become very complex. So people are a little bit nervous to say, let me not call it a chatbot, and let me call it AI, and then they embark on a slightly different path, and it takes a lot longer to deliver value versus delivering value more immediately.
I think for me, the word interesting is a big red flag. When someone says, my team, this is an interesting problem, that means we have fallen in love with the technology. And when I hear the word impact or struggles or problems or money, I think those to me are good keywords to
Yeah, you need these. I used to be CFO of a software company, and when people said it had this particular project had strategic importance, I knew there was no return on investment. So it's kind of like that. Can we get a little bit specific? How many people here know about the concept of lookalikes and cloning? Do those terms mean anything to anyone in the audience? If so, put up your hand. Lookalikes, right? Not really. Okay, Jagdeep, can you tell us what the heck does JP Morgan Chase do with the word lookalike?
Can I go back to my last job? At Visa, we have a lot more data that we do clustering or lookalikes with, right? So we're able to take your transactions, the way you transact, where you transact, the type of merchants you transact with, and the card you use. Most of you probably have a mental block in your head that if a transaction's under $10, I'm going to use my debit card. If it's over this amount, I'm going to use my rewards card. So you have a certain behavior in how you pay for things and where you pay for things. So something as simple as your gas transaction, if you go to the same gas station about 70% of the time, we are not going to prompt you for that zip code because we know you. And the other thing that comes along is when we start doing clustering is, hey, you do this, and so does Musab, and so does Amarpreet. They're all in that same same segment, they're in the same cluster. So if I see that cluster moving towards a certain direction in terms of they're all moving from buying Starbucks to buying Pete's, they're all moving to going from Macy's to Nordstrom, I can start offering you suggestions so that predictability comes in. Now I can start saying, hey, people like you are doing this. And that becomes interesting to JP Morgan when we start looking at, okay, if millennials are starting to say, what can I start putting in front of them because I have that segment, I have a cluster that I can see their behavior changing and I can suggest it to someone else.
So, one of the things that comes to mind when I hear you describe that is the creepiness factor. Sometimes, why does Google know I'm going to work right now, even though I'm on vacation, but I should be going to work, and how long the commute is? So, creepiness versus utility is critical. Musab, on eBay, you guys connect unknown buyers and sellers, right? So trust is kind of pretty critical. In the early days, a lot of people lost money because they were fraudulent sellers. Today that almost never happens. Can you talk about how the data and the AI and trust come together?
That is a very interesting use case. As it was mentioned before that, bot attacks are becoming ever more sophisticated. Bots are imitating humans more and more, both on registration, on sign-in, and sort of on compromising your financials. And so we don't want to, the biggest thing that's holding the marketplace, any marketplace, is the trust between the buyer and the seller. And so what we've deployed our models to do is to go beyond the rule-based determination that, this IP is generating that amount of traffic, or that region is generating that number of requests, and be able to flag that. We've gone to biometrics and telemetry that allows us to measure how fast are you typing your user ID? How fast are you typing your password? What's the spacing between two critical letters like T and H, like the, right? There's a lot of research, and I have my colleague Anurag in the back who's done an impressive amount of work in that space. It allows us to actually zero in and very intelligently determine the difference between human to human login, human to machine. That, at the end of the day, really reinforces the trust that is holding our marketplace and allows us to offer a better service to our buyers and sellers.
And Sanjay, just can you tell us how many merchants do you have on your platform, Yapstone? How fast do you onboard? How fast do you offboard? Is it manual? Is it automated?
In the same regard as Musab pointed out about with eBay, you have a buyer and a seller. What we as a company focus, Yapstone, we provide the back-end infrastructure, the payments ecosystem for marketplaces. As commerce has transitioned from standard e-commerce more to marketplaces ecosystem that eBay invented. Now it's Airbnb, it's HomeAway, it's Uber. So trying to bring those drivers or property owners that are listing their property for vacation rent on Airbnb or HomeAway starts becoming complex because you don't know whether the home belongs to them, whether they are the right people, and on the buyer side, is it the same person who listed their property? You cannot solve that problem with just humans. So in the past, yes, we were vetting each homeowner listing their property, and soon we're processing over 3 million properties, and these are sub-merchants that are logging onto the platform that we have to vet. The only way you can do that is through data, and then data curated into models, and then models becoming self-learning models. So today, we've gone from relatively low percentages of auto-onboarded properties to literally 96, 97% of our properties that we onboard onto the platform, and these are millions of properties across the world that we onboard pretty much instantly using data.
So that, it's pretty amazing, because if you've stayed in an Airbnb or VRBO, the fact that you even can find that property and it didn't take 3 weeks or 18 days for someone to process the application, it has actually made your vacation possible. That's really cool. Yeah. So I want to switch tracks here a little bit, because one of the things that we've learned about the payment space over the last few years, particularly from a company like Uber, is that the best payment experience the best one is the one that just never happened. You get into the Uber and you say, you're Sanjay, are you Vijay? Yes. You get on your phone, start checking your email, and you get out and you say goodbye. There was no payment. You get a email. It's all just disappeared. And so the industry started moving towards this notion of what happens before the payment or the transaction and what happens after the payment and the transaction. And there's a feedback loop. And I'm wondering, over at Square, Amarpreet, you guys, are you thinking about that? Making the payment disappear and using the data before and after?
Yeah, Vijay, let me give you one example which is very close to heart, and I'm not promoting my products here, but just as an illustrative example. There's something called Square Marketing, which I think provides amazing value to both the buyer and the seller. And let me walk through a simple example. So let's imagine, Vijay, that you're a big coffee lover, which I'm assuming you are, and you go to a Blue Bottle coffee location. And you go there every day and you pay for your coffee, right? And they, in this case, use Square point of sale. Over time, the point of sale will infer that Vijay is a loyal sort of buyer. He comes there every day, spends X amount of money, and has that intelligence. Let's assume for whatever reason you stop going there, right? The system will now infer that a very loyal user, XYZ, has now churned and has not come back. And in this case, the seller or Blue Bottle Coffee will have the intelligence to say, do you want to give an offer to Vijay for Vijay to come back, right? So let's say in this case, the offer is 50% off your next coffee. Vijay loves the offer, comes back a week later, and the system is able to do this closed loop attribution. So you can see how through payments data, which is very invisible, the buyer saw value in terms of offer, the seller saw value in terms of loyal customers coming back. We can calculate the ROI, and even moving forward, you can then use a receipt product to then give feedback, right? And I think this is just a starting point. We just have
so let me challenge that. Doesn't sound very AI-like. Like I've used the Square receipt and I get a happy face, thumbs up, thumbs down. This sounds a little low-tech. Can you give us some more detail on what makes that really cool?
I will take as a compliment, Vijay, that when technology is sounding low-tech, that means it's invisible. Which
I get a smiley face, I'm happy, okay, I'm unhappy, and I'm like, what does that have to do with AI?
Yeah, but I think at the back end, Square system 9 years ago started with very simple heuristics. So in this case, happy face means to a seller, someone is happy, so they can give more offers to make you come back. But you can see the evolution where just through AI and machine learning, we can automate a lot of these things. So as a seller, on this case Blue Bottle, they can manage their multiple locations, multiple seller profiles, give customized offers at scale, process feedback at scale, and then take actions. So in this case, like at the barista level, an employee can take actions in a very sophisticated manner, just through better algorithms, better automation. And most things are very hidden, that as a buyer and a seller, you're not exposed to that.
Okay, so basically my smiley face is really simple, and it's, a 2-year-old could deal with that.
Yes.
But in the back end, you're processing all this data and telling me, am I now going to Pete's and I used to go to Blue Bottle? Okay, I like that.
Multiple sellers, multiple locations, multiple transactions.
Fair enough. So, Jagdeep, just, again, you've been at Visa, you've been at JP Morgan now. What are some of the things that you're doing in terms of interacting with your customers? We've had, call centers forever. Tech companies don't have call centers, they just have emails. Are you able to bring some of those services onto platforms that are powered by AI?
Yeah, so I'm in commercial banking now, right? So it's a high-touch environment. We are not doing it, but from a consumer banking perspective, JP Morgan is working on chatbots, is working on other mediums to get to it. The problem that still remains is you don't want to have a decision tree that's more frustrating than just calling someone. How many of you call the call center and just push 0? And then it says, oh, that's not a valid option. That frustrates you even more because 0 is the valid option to get to someone live, right? So if the chatbot and these things keep on asking me questions and I keep on answering back, that's a longer conversation than I want to have that one call resolution that we all want to get to. And resolve time should be less than 60 seconds if I can make it that way, right? So there's a lot of data that we're looking at is, could we know why you're calling? Were you on our website trying to log in and maybe that's why you're calling? Could we get to know that, hey, your card was blocked because of a fraudulent transaction and send you directly to fraud rather than sending you to 1-800 number and then sending you to fraud? So data is going to help do a lot of this routing on the back end if we can close the loop. So that's where we're not just looking at card data or transaction data, but ambient data as well. So if I know that phone, if I know the geolocation of the phone, could that add that to the rest of the data that I have on you to now be able to recognize you, which line you call us from, or which phone, or where are you home, are you at your office, based on geolocation and IP mapping.
So what about other services around the payments? I think like almost all the panelists are companies that offer lending and loans to people. Like I know Square has a lending business, eBay will lend to the marketplace lenders, Amazon is doing it, Yapstone is doing it. Sanjay, can you talk about like how does lending come into either user or offer of a vacation rental?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just to give you a quick example on what we are doing with data to make it a delight experience for both the seller and the buyer. So on the seller, I'll talk a little bit about the sellers, and I'm sure my panelists will talk a little bit about the buyers. On the seller side, anybody listing their property on HomeAway or VRBO, as they list their property based on data, based on heuristics, and based on models, we're doing something extremely unique in the industry. So we are able to offer that homeowner who, from our data perspective, we can determine is a good homeowner. We're able to offer them something called advance pay. So what that means is, I'm the homeowner, I've listed my property for vacation rent, you're booking that property in December, and this is July, I get paid for that trip, not in December, but in July. So as a homeowner, I've rented my property out, the stay is actually going to happen in December, I just got paid in July. So we advance pay the homeowners months in advance before the actual stay happens. We're taking the entire risk and fraud of that transaction completely on our books. And we're able to do that more effectively and not take a major financial liability on our books is just through a lot of the data and heuristics and models. So that's an example on what we can offer. We talk about payments as a company, but this is completely outside of the payments domain, completely away from swiping the card or processing the card. This is really delighting that homeowner or the seller to be on that platform and to be able to list their property.
What about Square?
So I think one thing we realized working with the sellers was that the number one reason they went out of business was lack of cash flow or lack of credit. And in this case, we're not talking about tens and thousands of dollars. It's like $1,000, $2,000, $500. And the challenge at that time was that for large banks to extend such a small amount of money was not very profitable. And they couldn't even model the risk properly. So in Square's case, we looked at our payments data, from sellers, which are just, transactions, and we could infer from that, what the risk was, and also figure out the best time to offer a loan. So it's a great example of just using data, which was in this case first-party data, to extend a very small amount of money at the right time, and then take it back through micro-transactions as the payments are happening.
So that's amazing that without that data and that AI on the data, we wouldn't have all these massive lending businesses that are actually helping micro-entrepreneurs. Fantastic. So at this point, I'd love to open it up for questions. Do we have any mics in the audience, or how does this work? We have one mic? Go ahead. Can we get a mic over to this gentleman in the middle? Go ahead.
So I think the question was how do we think blockchain will impact digital payments? Is that correct? Maybe I'll give it a quick try. So from a blockchain perspective, there are a number of use cases, but in particular, the one that at least we're focused on is blockchain for instant settlement, especially if it is a cross-border transaction. And so money movement from a cross-border perspective and doing instant settlement using blockchain is definitely a very, very powerful use case, and we're definitely embarked on that use case.
Are any of you others on the panelists doing crypto?
From my perspective, technology that's been in the market for 5 to 7 years in the internet space that really has not caught on yet, to me, that's a bit of a question mark. I'm not saying I love blockchain, Bitcoin, put it to the side, but blockchain is definitely, there's some opportunities there. I would say that people are kind of, to what was mentioned before, are falling in love with the technology without the use case. Blockchain becomes powerful when a number of players participate in that ecosystem. It makes no sense that internally within my company, I'm doing like an Ethereum or a chain implementation with a virtual blockchain. That might solve a small number of problems. I think that we're maybe not focused enough on the killer use case for a large ecosystem, blockchain-based, contract approvals or money movement or what have you. I don't think we're there yet, and people are not seeing that it's actually a game changer yet.
Yeah, I actually agree with Musab that, sorry Jagdeep, I agree that this technology is applicable when the entities don't have trust, and that maybe requires multiple sort of entities who don't know each other to come together. I think that's probably a good starting point to think about that. I'm a big fan of the technology. I think it will have massive implications. At Square, we are learning from it, and we don't have any interesting use cases to share yet, but I'm a big fan of the technology myself.
I think we made a couple announcements, I'll just say on that blockchain that, look, payments is a trust and risk mitigation business. Payment is not a technology business. So if you can build a brand on blockchain that can give you the acceptance in the relative marketplace that you're going after, blockchain will have great implications there, right? If you're just doing blockchain for technology's sake, you don't have a brand behind it, people don't trust it, blockchain by itself isn't going to solve anything.
Okay, we've got another question here.
For the question, I'll share with you where the battle lines are being drawn right now, which is there are a lot of players that are intermediating the relationship between the financial service provider and the customer or the small business. Think Amazon Echo, Google Home, Cortana, QuickBooks. They all want to intermediate the relationship to where the money movement back end becomes a utility, non-differentiated utility from account A to account B, and it happens, and it's trustworthy, and it's timely, and that's fine. But that's where ML and AI comes into play, because now I can add value. I know your grocery habits, I know your entertainment habits, and I can suggest things to you. That's where it becomes interesting.
Okay, we've got another question here.
Actually, beyond that, so let's say we're talking about the same level of intelligence that would be broad. Broader intelligence means, being beyond just what groceries you go to and, but what you prefer or what the people around in your family prefer. That was real intelligence, right? And building something like that is very difficult for anything that's, entrepreneurial. Very early stage, some of those difficulties are identifying the right talent or how you're going to be building that logic, and that's kind of what the question that I have is how do you make sure that the intelligence that you're building at the early stages is sufficient to be competitive, even if it's not that intelligent?
Who wants to take that? How do the poor entrepreneurs who are competing with these behemoths on the stage here actually go after this market? I think that was the question.
Maybe if we understood your question, it speaks to a little bit to what Amarpreet, you were talking about. Starting with a well-defined problem that you can build and test the market or solving that problem very, very fast, versus investing in a model-based, let's say, chatbot. Again, chatbots have been around for a while, and we didn't give it the name AI. Now, in the spirit of AI and ML, we're trying to invent something more complex, but it may be better to go back and say, okay, what is the problem that I'm trying to solve, and address the shortcomings of the previous chatbots where, as Jagdeep, you pointed out, it was so, the tree was so complex, so long, that it just frustrated somebody. And so let's take that frustration out of that system, make it a little bit more context sensitive before you make it even more neural heuristics based.
I think my point, just to add up to yours, is to look at customer struggle. And for me, that's what the magic is. Define your customer, define the struggle, and I think that's where the magic is, how to solve it. It so happens that AI, ML, chatbots are just one way to solve it. And I could care less, as a business owner, if that's the way to solve it. All I care about is, has that customer problem been solved? And there are a number of ways of solving it. And to me, I think that's where the magic is. Do we understand that really well?
So I think the advice given to you is find a great problem that needs solving. Yeah. And the fortunate thing is there's a lot of technology building blocks out there. Thank you. All right, I think we've run out of time, so I just want to do a quick summary of sort of what we heard. We heard that data has been around forever, but now we have machine algorithms and machine learning that can be applied to that data, and there are a lot of areas that it's being used in places like fraud, which allows you to rapidly onboard marketplace sellers and buyers, better user experience. We've had lookalikes, and clustering, which allows predictions on your preferences. We've got services that happen before or after the payment in terms of lending. We also have loyalty solutions or trying to manage your customer base. And then finally, I think nobody had any great answers for the blockchain question. Probably we come back in a year from now and marketplaces go away and they're just automated through smart contracts on blockchains, and then we'll have a new set of panelists. All right, thank you very much for attending, and we'll hand over to the next group.
Awesome.